Well, today, even though I see many of you speaking Croatian, some of you speaking French, but I'd like to welcome you in English, and we'll do a little tour of the exhibition organized by Sensa from the ICTY and Documenta, and I'm really honored to be here with you today and to explain in a few words the aim of this exhibition and most important thing that it wants to communicate the destruction of monuments in armed conflict. And it's focused, of course, at the armed conflict of former Yugoslavia, various armed conflicts that were happening from 1991 onwards throughout the region. And the exhibition is dealing as well, you'll see in the last part and you see it here as well, with monuments dedicated to resistance during the World War II. That also suffered a lot, and they were also wantonly destroyed in the 90s. The exhibition speaks about reflection from nowadays position of destruction of these monuments, and the important thing to emphasize in the beginning is that monuments are not accidental objects. Monuments are there with their purpose, and their purpose is to, let's say, communicate identity of certain group throughout generations, to overpass, you know, the limits of time and to send some messages through these forms that are kind of communication channels with future generations. So they incorporate some values of the society, like values of resistance, and also some values, religious, cultural values that are incorporated in that. So during the last war, monuments were not destroyed only as collateral damage of armed conflicts, but they were wantonly destroyed to overcome, to defeat the enemy. And it was happening, unfortunately, we have to admit it, we are here in Zagreb, in Croatia, but we have to admit that our side in the armed conflict was destroying monuments of the other side. The most terrifying maybe example of this is the old bridge in Mostar. You'll see many marvelous photographs done by war reporters, by artists who were here during the wartime, and some of these, many of these exactly photographs are material from the ICTY, from the tribunal in The Hague that was dealing with these crimes. And even though the tribunal in Hague did a big step forward in dealing with the destruction of monuments in armed conflict, the legal response to this destruction was not sufficient. In Croatia as well, we were working together with Zoran, Vesna, with our NGOs, we were working together on monitoring war crime trials in Croatia. So there are just few examples where destruction of heritage was part of indictment, and we had very few cases where people were indicted and then sentenced for this destruction. Of course, human life is something that is, you know, the most valuable, but still, destruction of monuments is something very important because it affects whole community, and not only for this generation, but also for generations to come. And even though the lack of this legal response, we had some good examples that can serve. We were talking a bit before the exhibition about nowadays conflicts in Syria and other parts of the world, in Ukraine. So what ICTY has done in this regard, with a few of its judgments, it can be really used for future prosecuting of crimes against humanity and war crimes, because destruction, wanton destruction of monuments, is defined as war crime and crime against humanity. Maybe we can do a little tour. If you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me and to ask. So I also originally came to Dubrovnik, and I won't say I had the chance, but I had the misery to live in some of these events in 1991 in Dubrovnik, and then escape as a refugee from Dubrovnik. And I can share with you a little boy's idea at that time when we were playing around and when we were saying no one would dare to attack Dubrovnik. And even though in the mind of, you know, kids, we're thinking that it is something that someone from abroad would attack. But as you see from these photographs by our photographer Pavel Urban, who died when he was photographing and filming the day December 1991. You can see that no one reacted at that moment to stop this horror that was going on in 1991 and 1992, and there were many monuments within the old town protected by UNESCO from 1979 that were destroyed. Also, if you come in future days to see exhibition, you can take your time and hear also testifying of people who lived there through the war and who give their testimony of what was happening there. And this idea, the oral history that Documenta was working on, it's very important because they collected memories of people who lived and who lived in different sides of the conflict and who were testifying and giving their testimony, but always with an idea to emphasize that peace and acceptance and reconciliation is something quite important. So in Dubrovnik, also thanks to UNESCO, most of these things, unlike Mostar, were restored. UNESCO was financing restoration of Dubrovnik. Some governments, like French government, they donated tiles from Toulouse for restoration of the roofs of the old town. And thanks to international community as well, Dubrovnik was restored quite shortly after the war. But unlike Dubrovnik, Sarajevo and Mostar, we'll see examples here, were affected as much and even more than the Dubrovnik siege of Sarajevo, destruction of the famous library in this Ottoman style, also destruction of Mostar Bridge. I was astonished 3-4 years ago when I came to Mostar with tourists from Dubrovnik that so many houses are like intact, as if war stopped yesterday, not so many years ago. So the lack of money, the lack of political will, and also the conflict between two communities and tensions in Mostar that still exist are one of the reasons why the heritage is not restored. And even though the bridge itself was restored, newer than the original was, maybe nicer in the sense of cleaner, but many things have not been restored, and also it reflects relations within the community, because from the state of heritage there, we can also see that relations within the community have not been restored in a proper manner. You'll see here that there are, besides these most known examples from Sarajevo, from Mostar, you will see also examples from other monuments in Bosnia. There were many mosques, and this was really a systematical campaign of destruction. You can see here testify of former president of Croatia before the ICTY on these issues. And we are waiting this year for the final judgment in Brlić and others case, which is the most important case regarding Croatian involvement in war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And leaders of this so-called Croatian state, so-called state in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they were in first level judgment, they were sentenced and they were condemned, but this year in October we are waiting for the second instance, for the final judgment. It's going to be interesting to see what the second instance chamber is going to decide on destruction of Mostar Bridge, because the first instance chamber, it was not in their focus, of course, because they were dealing with they were dealing with the concentration camps, with manslaughter of civilians, rape that was happening there. But also in one very important sentence, the tribunal said that even though the bridge, the famous old bridge of Mostar, could have been regarded as military objective, because bridges are used by army, they can be military objectives if they are, like here, a very strategical position. But then they continued and they said, even though it could have been regarded as military objective, its value, its historical value, not only for the people in the region, but for the mankind, overpasses its capacity to serve as military objective. So its destruction is a crime against humanity and war crime. So hopefully this important saying by the first chamber will be confirmed in the second instance in October this year. Many mosques, museums, libraries, so different heritage institutions were wantonly destroyed, and as I already said, these were not collateral damages of fighting between two armies. There was intention and there was a plan to destroy heritage in order to erase the identity of a certain group. And that's why we speak in the theory of heritage, we speak of mnemocide. It's a kind of neologism, but mnemocide, like a wanton destruction of collective memory. Because all these monuments, they collect kind of memory of the community. And there was a strong intention by political leaders to erase them, to destroy them, and by destroying them, they thought they will erase the memory. But then again, even the remains of the monuments, they tell a certain story. And even though when their form is destroyed with the photographs like these, with the artists who do work with the destroyed heritage, also with NGOs who give their efforts to present this to community, this heritage, this destroyed heritage continued to speak. And our dear friend who passed away last year, Predrag Matvejević, of whom you've heard maybe as an expert for Mediterranean, who was translated in so many languages, he was a great anti-fascist through his life, but he was one of the mildest and most tolerant persons I had a chance to meet. And he said, forms start turning in silhouettes and banality disappears. So even though some of these monuments, they were turned from very solid forms into silhouettes, their importance has not disappeared with their destruction, and that's why we do the effort to present this. You see the moment there where the famous old bridge in Mostar was bombed and destroyed by the British trial. And this is a trial of Perlic and others. Kosovo as well, France. So the pattern continued from the early years, from 1991 into Dubrovnik, 1999 in Kosovo. Same pattern continued, and it's not something new. It's not something, even though ICTY was maybe the first one to address it systematically from a legal point of view, it's not something new. Throughout the history, from antiquity, we can follow destruction of heritage, and in ancient Roman times, there was this term, damnatio memoriae. So the emperors who wanted to overturn, sometimes their brothers, their fathers, their mothers, they were raising their monuments and they were raising their faces in frescoes. And then throughout Byzantine period, with iconoclasm, destruction of icons, this was a trend that continued to modern day conflicts, World War II, burning of books that Heine has addressed in a certain way, where he said that when men start burning books, soon they'll start burning other men. And then there was our professor, Svetozar Livada, who said, who continued to this Heine's thought, and he said, yes, men try to burn books, but books, they're not keen to burn, they don't like to burn, so they resist. And I would continue, even monuments resist, and some silhouettes of them, they remain, and they give us good basis for the restoration and for the reflection of these sad events. Here it's maybe what Eugen is trying to start. It was an interview with Radovan Ivančević. And Radovan Ivančević, an academic, a professor, a very popular professor in the times of Yugoslavia of history of art, he was trying to bring history of art closer to younger generation, to the whole population. He was very often in 80s on television. This is the gentleman. And that's the moment you see behind him a photograph of Šibenik Cathedral, classified by UNESCO as one of the nicest examples of this square. The Šibenik Cathedral is one of the nicest examples of Renaissance architecture on the Dalmatian coast. The day the cathedral was bombed by Serbian and Montenegro army and destroyed, not completely destroyed, but damaged. Its dome was damaged. Radovan Ivančević, he resigned live on television as a president of the Society of Historian of Art of Yugoslavia, because he saw that this is the dome of the cathedral, and he wanted in his statement to emphasize the importance of heritage and the brutality of its destruction. And there is another interview of him after this one, where he was also live in the TV news in late November 1993, when the bridge in Mostar was destroyed. And in these times it was, I would say, even dangerous to speak publicly of Croatian role in destruction of the bridge in Mostar. And also for me, when I work as tour guide in Dubrovnik and I take groups to Mostar, I always have strong feelings when I explain to people that it was Croatian army that was responsible for this, because the bridge in Mostar was and still is one of the most important Ottoman monuments in the whole European area, and it speaks values and, you know, this amalgamation of different civilizations, of Ottoman civilization and the Occidental civilization that you know, mixed in these areas. And instead of emphasizing these achievements of mixture of different civilizations in the area of former Yugoslavia and Balkans, in war years the emphasis was, you know, on destruction and erasing old and cleaning, you know, cleaning the memory from non-wanted elements. And that's also something that's related to the term of ethnical cleansing, that also was further defined with the praxis and jurisprudence of the ICTY, and it can easily correlate to destruction of heritage, because ethnical cleansing, even though it seems very clean, very net term, cleaning of something, it's a very brutal term that emphasizes you know, destruction of everything that doesn't fit your ethnical pattern.
And this late night show on Croatian television was the first information for Croatia.
Sure.
That most destroyed and that Croatian forces doing that. Mm-hmm. This program was first information.
The first information
what it was. No,
it was the previous.
Yes, and that Radovan was the guest in the studio and speak about Mostar Bridge and how was bridge important.
Also as a symbol of connection between two communities in Mostar, and he was really outraged there, and because he was one of the biggest authorities, not only in Croatia but in the whole former Yugoslavia, so he had, you know, strength to criticize this, but it was really not popular to speak about these events. And even today, when you speak that Croatian army, there's unfortunately there's a big support for these generals who destroyed, who are responsible for the destruction in our society. So it's still so many years, and this is why these kind of exhibitions are important for wider public, because still, I would say, predominant opinion in our society is that, you know, we can live with this. The bridge was destroyed, but there was some, you know, bigger aim for it, and that's why it's important to speak about these things and to emphasize the importance of heritage as a unifying factor. Because you can always interpret heritage as something that divides us and say we are unique in this, and we are very special because we have this, we are the first one in the world in this, which, you know, sometimes we want to be proud, and we have a right to be proud. There are many things in our heritage that we can be proud of. But I would say that it's much nicer, and it's much, not only nicer, it's much more important for the society and for the well-being of society to interpret heritage as something that unites us, and then find, you know, similarities in our cultures.
I just wanted to add, maybe you already said, it's especially specific for the anti-fascist monuments, because what they did, they were the symbols of the heritage that we were sharing. Second World War. So the aim was to destroy everything that we were sharing, and to leave maybe religious objects, but even they also suffered. But this was specifically for the anti-fascists.
Because this was something that was not based on certain religion or certain ethnicity. It was really something, a heritage in common.
Destroy Moderna in our society.
Did you mention the conversation chief of Herzegovina was to Boban about the bridge. Yeah, but Tudor asked Boban what's happened, and then Boban said, "Oh, there was a great rain, and the bridge was quite old."
That was the sound, and also for the monument, and this goes well with Zoran's story. We'll come back to this topic, but also as Aneta mentioned, the resistance monuments. This was maybe one of the most beautiful and most expressive monuments by Vojin Bakic in Slavonia, the monument of resistance of people of Slavonia in World War II. Kamenska, a village in Slavony, and also Radovan Ivančević, who really had merits and who had capacity to explain it, and some other Croatian and international academics spoke about this monument with its leaves forms as one of the achievements not only for local history of art, but on a larger level with its abstract forms. And these modern monuments, deprived from their ethnical or any other values, they were a unifying factor for the whole Yugoslavia. And there were some 6,000 of these monuments, and you can see it's how do you say steel? Steel
from Sweden.
Steel from Sweden, yeah, it was the material that was used for these monuments. And then related to what Tudjman and Boban, I remember that still. And then what Boban and Tudjman were saying, that bridge in Mostar was destroyed due to the rain. There was a lady journalist who, at the time when this monument was mined by the Croatian army, the lady journalist, very known journalist at the time, she wrote that it was a wind that overturned the monument. And then who's historian. And then this monument, the steel from Sweden, was tested with airplane companies when they were building, because it's a very big monument, so it was important to have a solid monument. So they were testing it with the industry of production of airplanes, so they know that it can resist strong winds. So there was no chance that it was overturned by wind. And then this professor, Svetozar Livades, he checked even with meteorological center, and they told him, they gave him official document that there was no wind, it was very calm weather. And then another historian of art, very known curator in Zagreb, this lady also in 1991, when the monument was destroyed, if I don't tell you wrong, 1992, beginning of 1992, she said that it was Chetniks. She wrote in Viesnik, in a very red newspaper, it was Chetniks, Serbs who were destroyed.
And which, this is 10 years, so which armed groups have destroyed this now? Or all armed groups went against this or not?
Many armed groups were, like all armed groups were destroying monuments, but here what's important to say, this is the monument in Croatia. It was speaking about unity with other peoples of former Yugoslavia, so it was Croatian army who destroyed it. Croatian army, because
5 days
they
took. Yes, they took.
Yeah, but in many cities, we had in Croatia, we had some 6,000 of them, and more than 2,964 monuments dedicated to resistance were destroyed in the 90s. And it was an official campaign. It was a campaign that was orchestrated by the HDZ, by the party in power then and even today. Because they were wantonly trying to, change the keys of explanation of these monuments. These monuments, they communicate certain information, and this is some kind of pattern of explanation of the symbols. And they wantonly wanted to change the key for their interpretation, and they wanted to convince the population that these monuments, these anti-fascist monuments, and we all know what fascism did in Europe, they were communicating for decades some noble ideas. And then in the 90s, people in power, they said these monuments, they're about terror that was happening in Yugoslavia, they were about authoritarian, totalitarian regime. Even though as you can see from their form, their main message was, there's also an interesting video by Igor Grubic, a contemporary artist dedicated to these resistant monuments. They were communicating, ideas of freedom, which can really be seen from their abstract forms. And unfortunately, even today, there is not enough political will to restore these monuments. I remember Zoran and I were speaking with that new elected, it was in 2008 or 9, mayor of Dubrovnik, and we were speaking about restoration of monument in 2003.
We rebuilt it 3 monuments.
Only 3 monuments.
Jelova and Jadov.
Yeah, that
only
were
3
monuments from 2964 by official data. Only 3 were restored, and in Dubrovnik, kind of left-wing mayor that was kind of ideologically close to the values of resistance, he told us, "Oh, it's not time for anti-fascism yet." So this also tells us a lot about, you know, values in society. And again, I say that's why this exhibition is important to heal many things in our society. Just maybe one last word. These photographs, many unprosecuted destructions of monuments, and there are monuments from all over the region that were never dealt with legally. So, legal system is only one of the mechanisms that can deal with the destruction.
Yes, all picture.
And you know, legal system is just one part of the process with dealing with the past, and it's an important one because it has sovereignty, and the state is very much involved. So it's an official point of view, an official statement on destruction of monuments. That's why it's important, and also, you know, to penally prosecute all people who did crimes, who did major crimes during the war years. But then also museums and other institutions that deal with heritage, they have also their part of responsibility. And this is one of the rare exhibitions that you'll see dedicated to these issues. Because you have some museums, historical museums, museums of homeland wars that are now called in Croatia, that should be dealing exactly these issues. But I would say they would hardly, you know, host such an exhibition. For instance, in Dubrovnik we have a very nice, very big museum of homeland wars, but it tells us a different kind of story, because it's only one-side story with one-side approach to the armed conflicts. They attacked us, we were attacked, and it doesn't communicate the message of, you know, living together, of facing the bad things that happen in our days. So I think this is not only because my friends made this exhibition, I really appreciate it, but this is really a good and healing approach to war heritage that we have, that many museum institutions, especially historical museums, should communicate. And that's why we appreciate that you also showed us interest and to come here with us, and that you can also tell people who visit your institutions and embassies that they can come and see this story, because it's important, even though so many years passed from the war, but I'd say it's an issue that it's very important nowadays, because it is daily reflected on ethnical relations in Croatia and social issues in Croatia. So,
sorry if I can add something else.
Of course.
Destroying of the monuments didn't stop. We had 2010, 2013 on the island park where was these concentration camps before the Jasenovec. We put a replica of a plaque destroyed in 1990s. That was destroyed during next night. 2013 we put it again as coordination of the Jewish municipalities and Serbian National Council. It was destroyed during the next 7 or 14 days. Petrova Gora, the same author of this Kamensko, is the author of Petrova Gora monument, is destroying as we are speaking. People are stealing inox plates from it. And it's also a masterpiece like Kamensko. So it didn't stop. Yes.
It doesn't have
sorry
to
to-
such. No, it's with pleasure, because it's a process that continues, and it's not only
And
that
you cannot find prosecutor, you cannot find, police is totally...
There's still lack of political will to
Yes.
stop this destruction, especially of monuments dedicated to